I want you to do something for me right now. Reach into your pocket. Or if you're driving, maybe just visualize that little plastic card in your wallet or the glowing number on your banking app. We are looking at the most common, everyday object in the world. It is the thing you spend half your waking life chasing, worrying about, counting, or spending.
It's the water we swim in. And yet, if I asked you to define, truly define what that thing is, not just what it buys, but what it is in its essence.
I'd probably say, well, it's money. It's value. It's the thing that makes the world go round. It feels incredibly solid when you have it and incredibly abstract when you don't.
Exactly. It gets fuzzy immediately. It's a paradox. And that is why today is going to be a bit of a mind bender. We aren't just talking about economics today. We are tackling the metaphysics of money.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are doing something that frankly sounds impossible on paper. We are taking arguably one of the most dense, difficult, and famous chapters of economic theory ever written, and we are going to see if we can actually understand it. We are unpacking Karl Marx, Capital, Volume 1, Chapter 3, Money, or the Circulation of Commodities.
And look, I know what you're thinking. You hear Chapter 3 of Capital and you think, okay, here comes a dry lecture on 19th century British currency laws. But hold on, this text is wild. It is not dry. Marx writes about money like it's a character in a Gothic horror novel.
I was actually surprised by the tone. I expected charts and graphs, but he's throwing around references to Dante's Inferno, alchemy, shape-shifting, and religious fetishes. He calls money a radical leveler that extinguishes all distinctions.
It is incredibly vivid. He describes money as chrysalis, like a butterfly cocoon and a galvanochemical power. The mission for this deep dive is to unpack Marx's dialectical analysis of money. And dialectical is the key word there. He doesn't see money as a static object, a coin or a piece of paper that just sits there. He sees it as a process, a social relation that keeps shifting forms.
Right, it's not a noun, it's almost like a verb. It's a shapeshifter.
Precisely. To guide us through this, we are going to follow the strict roadmap Marx lays out in the chapter. It's a three-part journey, and each part gets a little, deeper. First, we look at the measure of values. That's money as it exists in our heads before we even spend it.
Okay.
Second, the means of circulation. The actual moment money changes hands and the risks involved. And finally, money in its independent form. What happens when money stops moving and becomes a power of its own?
Okay, let's unpack this. We start with part 1, the measure of values. And I want to pause here because this idea felt very counterintuitive to me. Marx seems to be saying that money does its most important work before it even physically exists.
That is the crucial starting point. Marx calls this the function of imaginary gold. Think about it practically. When a merchant puts a price tag on a ton of iron, or when you look at a menu in a restaurant, is there any actual gold or cash changing hands at that exact second?
No, it's just a sticker or a number printed on a piece of paper. The money isn't there yet.
Exactly. The merchant is performing what Marx calls a purely ideal act. They are looking at their commodity, the iron, and in their head, they are equating the value of that iron to a certain amount of gold. They're hanging a ticket on it.
So money serves only in an imaginary or ideal capacity here.
Yes, that's the phrase he uses.
So the price tag is basically a mental exercise, a collective hallucination.
In a way, yes, but it's a hallucination that works. And we have to ask why it works. Why can I say this ton of iron is equal to 2 ounces of gold? Why not compare it to a cloud or a song or a sentiment?
Because they both have value.
But what is that value? This goes back to the core of Marx's theory for the previous chapters. He argues that the iron and the gold are commensurable. They can be measured against each other because they share a common substance. And that substance isn't atoms or molecules. It is objectified human labor.
Right, okay. So the gold is just a physical way of saying X hours of human effort.
Yes. Money supplies the material to express that labor value in a universal language. It's like a universal translator for effort. But, and here is where people get tripped up, and where Marx actually roasts the English economists of his day for getting this wrong, there is a massive difference between money as a measure of value and money as a standard of price.
I'll be honest, when I was reading the source material, I had to reread this section 3 times. Measure of value versus standard of price. In everyday English, those sound like the exact same thing.
They do, and he says English writers confuse them constantly. But in this framework, they perform 2 totally opposite functions. Let's try to break it down with an analogy. Think about weight. The measure of value is like the concept of gravity or heaviness itself. It's measuring how much social substance, in this case labor, is in the object. It's the economic content.
So the what?
The what's. The standard of price, on the other hand, is the metal weight itself. The ounce, the pound, the kilogram. It's the technical unit we use to count the heaviness.
So the measure is evaluating the content, and the standard is just the ruler we use to measure it.
Close. Think of it this way. The measure of value depends on the labor required to mine the gold. This is variable. If we discover a massive, easy-to-access gold mine tomorrow and gold becomes as common as sand, what happens to the value of gold?
It drops. It takes less labor to get it.
Right. And if the value of gold drops, the prices of everything else in the world would technically skyrocket.
Yeah.
Because you need a lot more of this cheap gold to equal the labor in a ton of iron. The measure has changed.
Right.
But does that change what an ounce is?
No, an ounce is still an ounce. A pound is still a pound.
Exactly. That is the standard of price. It is purely technical. It's a fixed weight of metal defined by law. The government says this much weight of gold is called a pound sterling. That standard doesn't measure value. It measures the quantity of the gold itself.
Okay, that clicks. So the measure evaluates the commodity. It's like saying value maps to gold. But the standard just weighs the money itself. The quantity of gold gets a unit name.
You got it. And Marx points out that historically, these things drifted apart. The names of money, pound, leve, thaler, originally referred to actual weights. A pound sterling was literally a pound of silver. But over time, kings and princes started debasing the currency.
Which is the polite way of saying they rip people off.
Basically, they would melt down the coins, put in less silver, but keep calling it a pound. This created a drift where the money name separated from the actual weight.
And what's the significance of that?
Marx says this separation proves something profound. Price is just a name. It's the money name of the labor objectified in a commodity.
I mean, because it's just a name,
Yeah.
it can lie.
Yes. This is the incongruity of price. Marx notes two types of lies here. First, the quantitative incongruity. You might sell your corn for more or less than it's actually worth in labor time just because of supply and demand.
That's just market noise.
Right. Marx calls this the blindly operating averages. But then there is the qualitative contradiction. This is the part about selling things that shouldn't be sold.
This is where the philosophy hits hard.
It really does. Marx notes that the price form allows us to put a price tag on things that have no value in the labor sense.
Yeah.
You can sell uncultivated land. You can sell your conscience. You can sell your honor.
The imaginary price.
Exactly. The price form becomes a veil. It masks the reality. Money becomes this radical leveler where everything, whether it's a ton of iron, the bones of a saint, or your own integrity, looks the same because it all has a price tag.
He has that quote from Dante in there.
Oh, it's brilliant. He's referencing a scene where St. Peter is quizzing Dante on his faith. St. Peter says, "We know the alloy and the weight of this coin, but tell me if you have it in your purse."
That is such a heavy quote for an economics text.
It is. Marx is saying that while we can measure value ideally in our heads, while we can put price tags on everything, the market demands the real thing. Hard cash lurks behind the ideal measure.
You can imagine the price all you want, but eventually you have to verify it. You have to sell.
Exactly. And that brings us perfectly to part two, the means of circulation. The money has to move.
We move from the idea to the act.
Right. Marx calls this the social metabolism. I love this biological metaphor. Society is like a giant body. The labor, the linen, the corn, the iron, these are nutrients, but they are in the wrong place. The weaver has too much linen. He can't eat linen. It's useless to him.
So he needs to move it to someone who needs it.
He does.
Yeah.
And the mechanism for this movement is that famous formula, CMC, commodity, money, commodity.
Selling in order to buy.
Correct.
Sure.
And Marx uses a specific narrative here to illustrate it. It's almost a little play. We have a weaver. He has 20 yards of linen. What does he do?
He sells the linen for £2. That's the CM commodity to money.
Right. And
Then he takes that £2 and buys a family Bible. That's the MC, money to commodity.
a wholesome exchange. But Marx doesn't stop there. He follows the money. The weaver has his Bible. He is out of the market. But the money, the £2, is now in the hands of the Bible pusher.
And the Bible pusher isn't looking for edification.
No. Marx notes, with a bit of shade, that the Bible seller prefers a warming drink to cold sheets. So the Bible pusher takes that same £2 and buys brandy from a distiller.
So we have a chain. Wheat becomes linen. Linen becomes Bible. Bible becomes brandy.
And notice what is happening to the money versus the commodities. The linen gets made into a shirt. The Bible goes on a shelf. The brandy is consumed.
They fall out of circulation. They get used up.
Yes, exactly. But the money stays. It keeps moving, pushing the next commodity along. Marx says circulation sweats money from every pore.
Now, before we get to the speed of that money, we have to talk about that first step again, the CM selling the linen. Marx calls this moment the Salto Mortale.
The fatal leap. This is one of the most crucial concepts in the chapter. When the weaver takes his linen to market, he is taking a massive risk. He has to turn his commodity into money. If he can't, the linen is useless to him.
Why is it fatal? Is it just because nobody might want linen?
That's part of it. The commodity has to prove it has a use value. But it's deeper than that. Marx says this process proves whether the labor was socially necessary.
We should unpack that socially necessary part because it sounds like jargon, but it's actually really important.
It is. Suppose our weaver is slow. Suppose he spent 10 hours weaving that linen, but a new machine has just been invented that lets people weave it in 5 hours.
Uh-oh.
The market isn't going to pay him for his 10 hours. It's only going to pay him for the social average, the 5 hours. His extra labor is wasted. It doesn't count.
Ouch. So his time is devalued instantly.
Or another scenario. Suppose there are just too many weavers. The market is flooded. Even if his linen is good, if society doesn't need that much linen, his labor fails to validate itself. It proves to be unnecessary.
That quote really stuck with me. If the leap falls short, it is not the commodity which is defrauded, but rather its owner. The linen doesn't care. The weaver goes hungry.
Exactly. This connects to why money is so vital. It is the only thing that validates that your private labor actually matters to society.
It's the moment of truth.
It is. The division of labor is a web woven behind the backs of the producers. The weaver works in isolation, thinking he is doing something valuable, but he doesn't know for sure until he attempts that fatal leap.
It seems like a system full of contradictions. You have the use value, which is I need a shirt, clashing with the exchange value, which is I need money.
Yes, and Marx uses a beautiful analogy from physics here to explain how circulation solves this. He talks about elliptical motion.
Right, the planetary orbit. I love that part.
He says, how does nature solve the contradiction that a planet wants to fall into the sun because of gravity, but also wants to fly away from it because of inertia?
It orbits.
It doesn't destroy the contradiction. It creates a form in which the contradiction can move. An ellipse. Circulation is the same. It allows the contradiction between buying and selling to coexist in a moving system.
But speaking of moving systems, this brings up the question of quantity. If the money is constantly flying from the weaver to the Bible guy to the distiller, how much money does a country actually need?
This brings us to the velocity of money. It's a fascinating rebuttal to what was then the dominant idea, the quantity theory of money.
The theory that says if you print more money, prices go up, which sounds like standard economics 101 today.
Well, Marx flips it. He argues, remember, we're assuming a gold standard where money has intrinsic value, that prices are determined first by the value of the commodities. The amount of money in circulation is a result of those prices, not the cause.
Wait, run that by me again. How does that work?
It depends on velocity. In our example, we had a single 2-pound coin. It moved from the weaver to the Bible seller to the distiller. That one coin facilitated 3 different transactions. If it moves fast enough, that one coin can do the work of 6 or 10 pounds. If it completes, say, 4 transactions in a day, that 2-pound coin has circulated 8 pounds worth of goods.
So if money moves fast, you need less of it. If it moves slow, you need more.
Precisely. Marx gives us a formula. The quantity of money equals the sum of prices divided by the velocity of circulation. He compares it to a machine. If the gears turn faster, you need less fluid to keep it running.
But what happens when the money physically wears out? I mean, gold is soft. If it's moving that fast, passing through thousands of hands, it's going to lose weight, isn't it?
It is. And this is where Marx introduces the transition to symbols. He points out that as gold circulates, its real content, the actual weight, splits from its nominal content, the name.
So a coin might say 1 pound, but after 10 years of use, it might only weigh 90% of a pound.
But it still buys a pound's worth of goods.
Right.
Exactly. The coin becomes a symbol of itself. And Marx says if a piece of worn metal can act as a symbol, why not replace it with something purely symbolic, like paper?
Enter paper money.
Enter paper. But Marx insists that paper money issued by the state only works because it represents the gold that would be there. It's a symbol of value. And this relies on state compulsion forced currency laws. The state says, you must accept this paper as if it were gold.
And if the state prints too much of it?
Then each note just represents a smaller and smaller fraction of that ideal gold. Inflation.
So we have moved from money as an idea in part 1 to money as a moving symbol here in part 2. But now we hit the third part of the chapter, and the tone seems to shift again. We get to money as an independent form.
This is the dialectical turn. We saw circulation, CMC, selling to buy. It's a flow, but every flow can be interrupted. What happens if I sell my linen, the CM step, but I don't buy the Bible?
You just hold on to the 2 pounds.
I just keep the money.
You are hoarding.
You are hoarding. And this creates money in its independent form. It's no longer just a medium to get commodities. It becomes the end goal itself.
Marx gets very psychological here. He talks about the passionate desire to hold on to the money.
He does. He describes the hoarder as someone who sacrifices the lusts of the flesh to the fetish of gold. It's a kind of religious devotion. The hoarder stops consuming, stops enjoying life, wears rags just to accumulate this crystallized social power.
But he also calls it a Sisyphean task, like pushing the boulder up the hill forever. Why is it Sisyphean?
Because of a fundamental contradiction in the nature of money. Qualitatively, money has no limit. It is the radical leveler. It can buy anything: labor, goods, power, conscience. It is the universal key.
But
quantitatively, the actual sum in your pocket is always limited. You have 50 pounds or 100 pounds.
So you have a tool that can buy everything, but you never have enough of it to actually buy everything.
Exactly. That gap between the infinite potential of money and the finite amount you possess drives the hoarder to accumulate endlessly. They are chasing the horizon. He says they're like a world conqueror who annexes a country and immediately looks for the next border.
Does this hoarding serve an economic purpose, or is it just madness?
Marx argues it is essential. Hoards act as reservoirs. Remember the velocity of money. Sometimes the economy slows down, circulation contracts. The extra money needs somewhere to go.
It goes into the hoards.
It dives into the hoards. When trade picks up again, it flows back out. The hoards regulate the flow, like a cistern in a water system.
But hoarding is just the primitive form. Marx then takes us to a more advanced form of independent money, means of payment. This sounds like debt.
It is debt. In simple circulation, you and I stand face to face. I give you linen, you give me gold, deal done.
Yeah, right.
But in advanced production, things take time. Maybe I need to buy seeds now, but I won't have the wheat to sell for 6 months. So I buy from you, but I pay you later.
The relationship changes. We aren't just buyer and seller anymore.
No, we become creditor and debtor. And Marx notes this isn't just a friendly arrangement. It can be antagonistic. He mentions how in Rome in the Middle Ages, this struggle between debtor and creditor ended in ruin and slavery.
And this introduces a new role for money. It's not just buying things, it's settling the contract.
Yes. Money functions as a measure of value now to determine the debt, and only later as hard cash to settle the debt. And this leads to the possibility of crisis. This is one of the most famous and dramatic parts of the chapter. Marx talks about the monetary famine.
Is this the hard pants for water moment?
That's the one. Imagine a chain of payments. A owes B, B owes C, C owes D. Everyone is relying on the next person to pay. In good times, credit flows easily. People act arrogant. They say, money is just an illusion. Commodities are the only real wealth. We don't need gold, we have faith.
But then the chain breaks.
Someone defaults. And suddenly credit vanishes.
Yeah.
Nobody wants your linen or your sugar or your promises. They only want one thing.
Hard cash.
Hard cash.
Yeah.
The illusion suddenly becomes the only thing that matters. Marx writes, as the heart pants after fresh water, so pants his soul after money, the only wealth.
It's a total flip. In the boom, money is nothing. In the bust, money is everything.
That is the dialectic in action. The contradiction between the commodity and its money form bursts into the open. The bourgeois system, which pretends to be rational, suddenly looks like a panic-stricken scramble for gold.
And speaking of gold, the chapter ends by zooming out to the global stage. World money.
This is the final transformation. When money leaves the domestic sphere, when it crosses borders, it takes off its national uniform.
No more coins, no more paper symbols with faces on them.
No. On the world market, money returns to its original primal form, bullion, gold and silver bars. Marx says that in the world market, commodities develop their value universally, so they need a universal money.
It's the absolute social materialization of wealth.
And it flows like a tide. Marx describes the balance of trade not as a static thing, but as a constant flow of gold and silver between nations to settle these international accounts. It's the ultimate reality check for any economy. You can print all the paper symbols you want at home, but on the world stage, you need the real substance.
So what does this all mean? I mean, we've gone from the price tag in our head to the coin passing from hand to hand, to the hoard in the basement, and finally to the gold flowing across oceans. What's the takeaway?
If we step back, What Marx is showing us is how a social relation, the labor we do for each other, gets alienated from us. It turns into this thing, this metal object that stands outside of us and controls us.
The Alchemist's retort.
Yes, Marx calls circulation the Alchemist's retort. You throw everything into it, your labor, your linen, your Bible, even, he says, the bones of saints, and it all gets boiled down and comes out as this one homogeneous crystal: money.
And that crystal extinguishes all distinctions. It doesn't matter if the money came from weaving linen or selling brandy or something worse, it's just money.
Money represents not what has been transformed into it. It has no smell. Marx has this great line: money may be dirt, although dirt is not money. It is a radical leveler because it reduces all quality, all the unique beauty and effort of human life into a mere quantity, a number.
That is a haunting thought. We built a system to help us exchange goods, and it ended up flattening everything into a ledger entry.
That is the power of Marx's analysis here. He isn't just explaining how a bank works. He is explaining how our social reality is constructed and how we become dependent on this web that, as he says, is woven behind our backs. We don't control the process controls us.
It certainly makes you look at that coin in your pocket differently. It's not just a piece of metal, it's a social pledge. It's a piece of solidified social power.
And a reminder that while we look at the price of things, we rarely look at the cost of the system that sets the price.
A provocative thought to end on then. If money turns everything into a quantity, what happens to the things and the people that refuse to be quantified? Can they survive in the Alchemist's retort?
That is the question, isn't it?
Thanks for diving deep with us. We will catch you on the next one.